Welcome to Dwellings, a podcast from the City of San Jose Housing Department, where we talk with experts about ending homelessness, building affordable housing, and exploring housing policies at the city and state level. I'm your host, Allie Rico. On today's episode, I'm joined by David Friedlander, CEO of the Change Order Group, a climate and innovation-focused development company, for a conversation about what the future of housing might look like.
Housing construction in the Bay Area is incredibly expensive. What are you expecting to see from both the real estate, like purchase market, and rental prices when the pandemic ends, whenever that might be?
Yeah. To answer this question, kind of have to go back to 2009 or thereabout and start looking at when essentially what happened with, the buildup of 2009 and 2007, the subprime conditions that caused it were a function of people, essentially commoditizing the American dream, building houses so people could occupy them, taking enormous amounts of risk with debt on the supposition that there would be future markets for housing for various adjacent industries, right? We get through that, and instead of bailing out tenants and homeowners, the Fed and the government decided to bail out the banks. And in my mind, it just solidified the commoditization of housing, and where essentially whoever has the most money wins, And for the last 10 years, most of capital market real estate development has been focused on places like San Francisco and New York City, because these were hubs of global finance. So the richest people in the world, there's a million millionaires in California, and by far the highest percentage of billionaires in the world in San Francisco. The median price. So you're just so packed with money. Now the thing was, money used to like multifamily development, largely because they saw it as both an appreciating asset and also, I heard this term recently called a swanctuary, which is right up there with McMansion. So it's like, I don't know about you, but I can't afford a $5,500 two-bedroom apartment, Yet it seemed to be, New York City and San Francisco, they just kept on building and building these things. And this has been, my rallying cry for ages, which is, that the stock is a mismatch for the market. And if you actually want good stock, you have to go back in time when architecture was actually built around people's needs instead of this commodity focused development. And instead of designing around, people's needs, designed around marketing needs. And those are, oftentimes. So anyway, to get to your answer, like in 2015, Ed Glazer did this report. I was just looking at it the other day. What was it? At the time, the average unit construction cost with what's minimum profit, MPCC, was $800,000, and only no. Yeah, the cost was like it was around $250,000, and the actual sale price was $800,000, and all of that was around land use restrictions and all this nonsense. It had nothing to do with the actual cost of the house.
Because land around here is so expensive, and then I'm like I have just touched the surface on understanding the cost of land and the cost of construction, but I've heard from attending public meetings and listening to council meetings that the cost of developing market rate or affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing, is going through the roof. So if you want to talk a little bit more about like how construction costs and land use costs kind of also impact how those prices are going to either fluctuate or continue to skyrocket.
I mean, I'm going to allude to another question, which is like the future of cities. I'm going to go two ways with this question. One is there's certain places that are kind of always again, there's going to be a severe asterisk on this, but there are certain places that are kind of always beautiful. Generally speaking, those places and California in general is going to be a durable market because it's been a durable place for a long time. So kind of central locations with good weather and whatnot, those places are just going to always be valuable. Pre-COVID and all this stuff, I mean, there's long been huge labor shortages in the Bay Area, and that's driven by a number of things. One is just a lack of advocacy for the trade, which is kind of ridiculous. It's a very well paid trade, like carpentry is a very well paid trade, and it's very useful. And yet there's a shrinking body of skilled workers, and Issi, Romem did a report on that a couple of years ago about the declining number of young people interested in the building trades. So a scarcity of workers, and then on the top end, like general contractors and whatnot, they actually do have a very hard time because of the cost of land use restrictions and rising material costs and the cost, the overall cost of development. They actually do have a hard time. I don't want to overstate their plight, but it is a complicated formula to make things pencil, because the margins are tight, and then what generally how they deal with that is scaling up and making big the big capital projects go towards those towers and stuff like that. One of the asterisks that I had about California always being a beautiful place, I mean, I think the wildfires and droughts and stuff like that, and very very real threats can upend any of those sort of real estate maxims about durability of markets. The way America has been developing for ages is we just go where there are no land use restrictions, where the building oversight is minimal. So right now, the capital markets and a large flow of investment, they're all going to places like Arizona and South Carolina and places like this. And these are places that basically could not exist without air conditioning. Arizona, or I forget if it was Phoenix or all of Arizona, had 144 days over 100 degrees this year. So we're building these like colonies for people who live in climate controlled environments and just, depleting water tables and so on and so forth. So these environmental things are very, very real. And even like in Northern California, like in, I think in North Bay and whatnot, they're still building these single family houses, very, I don't want to say heedless. I think they're, getting quite aware, but eventually the cost of, I know there's large parts of, California that are becoming uninsurable.
What do you think will be different about where we build homes or where people want to live once this pandemic is over?
My parents, or my grandmother's family fled Germany in 1933, and I'm just, I just keep on looking. It's like these guys have dealt with this before, right? Like they've dealt with epidemics too, or pandemics or whatever. Like all these, and so to answer your question, like this kind of facile, like, density is wrong, because like if you go, so and also just to tell you how I relate, I'm back in Colorado kind of temporarily, and I was in New York, but I moved to New York from Colorado, and it was between moving to New York or moving to the Bay Area where my Aunt Spring lived. Mm-hmm. And And the reason I chose New York was the public transportation system, and that I was able to live car free, and that part was definitely great, and that was the determinative thing. Now, over the course of the last 10 years, 6 years or something like that, especially since the YIMBY conversation has been so vocal, I think there's been a little bit too much focus on just density as a catch-all, and density as a very nuanced topic, and something that really needs to be tempered with economic drivers, cultural, kind of societal needs for the particular place. So, so ideally, really people are not doing this. The American, and I was, I was in this Netflix documentary about minimalism, right? And my whole thing, and I was in part of this Making Room exhibition with the National Building Museum and whatnot, and really just speaking out against the sort of the ravages of single family housing. And Americans really don't seem to have learned their lesson. They don't really understand how destructive single family housing is on so many levels, and how many options there are between a McMansion and like a micro apartment, like townhouses are great, duplexes, triplexes, whatever,
Yeah.
This is smart density. And I mean, this is a concept with the change order group. I'm trying to build a fund and investment and development platform. And I have an idea which is called the minimum viable building. And essentially what people do is, developers and investors do nowadays, is they create these housing, but it has no relationship to the environment, to the local economy, to food, to food. Like what happens when there's food shortages? Do we have local agricultural resources to handle this, to handle the density that or are we relying on, what the vagaries of the climate in Iowa, right? And really considering every part of how what does this building touch, the people it touches, the economy it touches, and just really thinking that through.
You've like kind of touched on this a little bit. There's been this conversation about how like cities are canceled or cities are over, and we're seeing a lot of people that are leaving. Like I know that there's been plenty of plagues and pandemics in all of our cities in the past, and like that's why older apartments in New York look the way they do, where they have like windows going all the way through front to back, so there's airflow. Do you think that that's actually true? Like our
so
cities,
the impact of health and all that?
Yeah, like our cities canceled.
Cities as a urban formation I don't think are ever going to be, we've been going since Mesopotamia, more or less. But these mega cities are unsustainable, straight up. And to my mind, I think they because a lot of them do have intrinsic values, I think they should be retrofitted, but definitely not built up in the same way. Really dispersing populations and planning and legislating for economic, racial, cultural diversity.
You've mentioned it, and I've looked at some of your Medium pieces about the kind of like, I think you might have called it in one piece like congregate living, the
Mm-hmm.
idea of like you have shared amenities, but you have your own sleeping living space.
Yeah. I think what I think is the future of like co-living and collaborative living, it becomes much, this is my ideal, and this is where, I want to go, is, seeing it far more integrated into the process, like really taking into consideration human needs and the efficiencies that can come from things like congregate housing. Because Um, uh, I mean, I've been married and I've been in a number of committed relationships and lived with people and children and various and roommates and whatnot. Uh, but at the ripe age of 44, like I don't like living with other people if I'm single, right? Like I like my own damn space. And I think most people agree with that. Like you need a place where you can kind of stow away and lock away. And the fact is, I mean, I don't know what the stats were before, but 28% or there, I mean, definitely in the last census, it was around 28% of the population is single, and it might even be high. I think it's higher than that. Anyway, like a huge proportion of the population is single, and we need to have really good options for them. There's just, and the other thing with like, I mean, I mean, it probably varies a little bit, and you can vary the product a little bit, but like, I don't like cooking for myself. It's like, it's depressing, and kitchens are one of the main expenses. So, having just my own private space that I can call my own, and, and have access to other stuff, and, social spaces and whatnot is, I mean, that's what they do in Europe. So let's just do what they do in Europe. It's like, why are we acting like this is a new problem? Like, oh, like, oh, people like to interact with other people instead of just being holed up at, watching 6 hours of CNN, like, oh, you can go to the, the plots and like, talk to your old school chum, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you see, given like the pandemic and everything, do you see that model of housing still succeeding in the future, or like what kind of shifts are going to need to happen in order for that type of housing model to still be successful?
Yeah. I mean, people are going to need to I mean, first of all, there have been some reports that, and I have some, substantiation of this, that, some areas with co-living are actually doing quite well because of the social isolation aspect, right? Um, I was in New York City until March, and, as things shut down, like the value of the city is gone. So all of a sudden, like I couldn't go to restaurants and, museums and whatnot. And all of a sudden the architecture got a lot less interesting, and I was like, I want to go into nature. And, I think a lot of people, follow that same impulse. But, with the co-living model, you have a certain level of socialization, built into your housing. And, people, are talking about the public health threats of COVID, but, like all these things like, social isolation. I mean, I heard, suicide numbers are through the roof right now, and all these things. So we need to design housing around people's needs. And I think, having a strong social component like co-living. I mean, you can kind of always tweak with the particulars of it, but essentially having, a private space and shared amenities. I think that's not going to go away. Now, here's the big aha moment I had in the last couple of years, which is, really co-living is not that much different than a hotel. And right now the hospitality industry is collapsing like no other industry. And, I'm a big believer in low hanging fruit and obvious answers. And, while I was under the employ of Panoramic Interest, I did a white paper for them, about converting residential hotels and bringing back the residential hotel, which, I did some research on it. And if you ever are into the topic, check out this guy named Paul Groth. And he goes into the history of residential housing in San Francisco. It was a huge part of the, I want to say it was like 14% of the overall housing stock was like full-time residential hotel. I've been living more or less in hotels for the last year for a variety of unfortunate reasons. But I like hotel living as a single person. And some other research that I'm pretty sure Issi Romem was responsible for as well, was talking about how when the economy is doing well, people tend to move around, and having, lightweight, safe, clean accommodations, is a vital part of that. And I think there's a ton of potential for really bringing that model back. And with the collapsed residential market, it's kind of the high time to do it.
Yeah, and we're kind of already seeing it here with Project Home Key. Granted, they're being bought for sheltering our homeless residents, but it's that same idea of like these hotels aren't being used, and what a waste of letting them sit vacant when they could very easily house 70 or 80 people.
Hotels are awesome. Yeah, but and it's like, okay, well, you can make one a homeless one, but you could also make one for people making $27,000 a year, and those people are going to have a lot, those people might like really enjoy it, and I don't know. I'm a huge fan of hotel living, and I mean, kind of going back. I mean, it was so unfortunate, but I mean, I think it's in my blood. My grandmother, Eva Strauss, she actually eventually landed in Berkeley, but she left Germany in 1933, and then was in Switzerland, France, and England, and like all these places in between, in New York, where she met my grandfather. And it's just, it's actually a lifestyle that, was once quite in fashion, like, living in hotels, and, you go down to, sometimes they have a restaurant, and you go down and you see people, or you don't,
And we also, in San Jose, we've been opening these like modular tiny homes for the ones that we've been opening have been to house our homeless neighbors. Does the concept of like that type of living, does that also kind of fit the model that you see of the future of co-living, or is that a separate? That question makes sense.
I mean, yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, there's the answer is, right now, what are we at, 7 some billion people? There's a lot of answers. I would say, in general, looking at the Scandinavian, Swedish co-housing model is really good. Kind of medium density planned communities, and it's usually around families, and when you have families, your needs are very specific, I don't think it has to be that complex for single people. Like, you just put them in a hotel and you have a hotel lobby, and you make them appropriate to the price point, and, some are going to be fancier than others, but, I mean, congregate housing is a very specific type. It's a specific type of a specific term. I think it's usually it's a bedroom to kitchen ratio. Okay. So I think like in San Francisco, it's like 8 beds to a full kitchen, and it's usually, I think it's not always applied to student housing and stuff like that, but it's a lot of housing typology like that. But there's things like co-living and co-housing, which are a little a little more fuzzy in terms of what those mean structurally and design wise. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've tried all this stuff, like, I'm divorced, and like, our apartment was, we lived in a micro apartment, and frankly, without sort of the infrastructure, it was for all these things to disperse the childcare and having a social network, it didn't work. Like, it really has to be part of an ecosystem,
So I'm wondering, like, as we progress into the future, I think there really is this desire from some people to see less of these huge buildings and more of these missing middle, like smart growth, slow density kind of buildings. And I'm wondering, like, what your thoughts are on the future of that.
The problem is that the towers are already built,
Yeah.
And I mean, what I've been trying to do for the last 10 years is say, don't build the towers, build the missing middle. I like to, there's like a Buddhist, I'm paraphrasing Buddha quote, which is like, it's easier to cover your feet in leather than it is to cover the world with, or, smooth out the world or something like that, So I'm big into, I really think this is a good time to like kind of bring back a counterculture really. And I think using houses, using our architecture, whether it's, subdividing single family housing. I actually think that is the quintessential architectural form of America, is sort of like the added on single family house, so in a certain way that the ADU is kind of part of that heritage. And I would love to see, people densifying suburbs, because here's the thing, they're built, they're there, and pretty soon they're going to be really cheap, and it's better to use what we got instead of, continuing to build something new.
What trends do you anticipate seeing over the next like 5 or 10 years, when the decision makers in like city and state governments should keep in mind when it comes to like urban planning and managing their housing stock and even finding sources for affordable housing?
Well, legislators need to really get serious about climate, because I mean the reason I've chosen climate real estate as my thing is its ability to impact climate change and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases, whether it's through embodied energy of construction, whether it's operational energy of the actual house, or how people relate to the house, through mobility and local economics, right? So this is the place. One of the biggest, culprits was air travel. That's been kind of derailed. I mean, a lot of the COVID has had an unintended effect of shutting down a lot of major, huge greenhouse gas emission emitters. And I mean, I would love, instead of like recharging starting up the factories again, this is a great time to like say, hey, how are we going to be around in 100 years? Because a lot of places won't, like Miami won't. I mean, all estimates and all projections point to Miami not being there like in 20 or 30 years, much less 100 years. So legislators need to get real about climate and planning and the impact of unaffordability, because essentially what's happening, there's going to be these massive rent delinquencies, and defaults on mortgage and whatnot, and then there's just going to like everything's going to shut down, and we have the information, we have the data, we see where it's going, and we see how the data points of today line up pretty damn nice with the data points of 2007, 2008, but also 1929. So legislators really need to get clear about the severity and the magnitude of the threats facing their municipalities. So that's one. And two is to start taking care of themselves instead of taking necessarily state direction. I have faith in, I don't have faith in, I have very little faith in large groups, but I have faith in myself and individuals, and I've seen change in myself, and I feel like other people can change too. So it's like, let's go to Vienna. What did they do in the similar conditions when they had hyperinflation? How did they solve their problems? They created these amazing housing,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like looking at historical precedent like that, I mean, really, the analogs of the two eras are striking. Dust Bowl. I mean, well, I guess I don't know. Europe had Dust Bowl, but certainly had a depression and hyperinflation in the 20s and 30s, and that's when some of the most innovative social housing came out. And I actually read something the other day. It was like something like 74% of Vienna's population lives in state housing.
Wow.
It's like insane. Yeah. And I mean, like, again, like why there's all the, I'm involved with like this whole, prop tech and startup scene. And I have a big, a big gripe with all of them. It's like, we don't need as many startups is we need follow-ups, and
Yeah.
and like, first of all, make sure that the properties that we do have are safe and clean and healthy. And then if we're looking to do stuff that's, if we're looking to answers to questions, like, creating affordable conditions and social things, like, look to places that have solved for this.
Thanks so much to David for joining me on today's episode. To learn more about the Change Order Group and the work they're doing on climate-centered master planning, visit their website at changeorder.group. Thanks for listening to Dwellings, the City of San Jose Housing Department podcast. Our theme music is Speed City, composed and performed by Attain Charles. Thanks to San Jose Jazz for letting us use your music. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. If you're looking for more ways to get involved with housing and homelessness response, please check out the show notes. You can follow the Housing Department on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at SJ City Housing. Our artwork is by Chelsea Palacio. Dwellings is produced by me, Allie Rico, and Jeff Scott of the Housing Department.